one of the things that a pastor really has to lead in is evangelism because your obedience to Christ depends on it. The future of your church depends on it. You simply have to lead a church to be evangelistic. Paul is both missionary and theologian. And as a pastor, you've got to be both pastor, teacher. You're the guy who stands up there and teaches them the word, but you also have to lead in evangelism. In fact, everything rises and falls on leadership. So I don't really like to accept that responsibility. Everything in me somehow wants to deny that. And we really get to thinking that if we just preach and tell people what they should do, that they'll do it. But that's just not the way it works. You really do have to model. Jesus called 12 disciples that they should be with him. And really that's the key to any kind of discipleship. It's certainly the key to evangelism. You have to model it. People have to be with you. They have to see you do it. You have to teach them how to do it. You have to turn it over to them. So you're going to have to come up with a plan by which you help your church become evangelistic. Now, there are a lot of different strategies, and they are not necessarily mutually exclusive. It's not that you just have to choose one strategy and only do that one strategy. But you have to have a strategy because people aren't going to share the gospel. People aren't going to evangelize simply because you tell them to do it. So, what are the ways to do it? Well, a few key principles that I learned a long time ago, and I want to encourage you to trust me on this. These are true. Principle number one, masses in classes produce flashes and ashes. In other words, just having a big class and saying, now here is us teaching you to be evangelistic won't work. Masses in classes produce flashes and ashes. So you can have a class, you can tell everybody to do it, you can give your big hoorah speech and say, now go do that, and maybe they'll immediately do it once or twice, but that's just not going to work long term. Just having a class by which you teach evangelism is not a long-term solution. Now, let me say, by all means, have classes on evangelism. I'm just telling you that having a class on this one given Sunday or even devoting 6 weeks to this class or whatever, if that's all you do, it's going to produce flashes and ashes. Somebody might catch it, but it's just not going to last a long time. So you're going to have a strategy that is more than just, hey, y'all come listen to me teach on evangelism. Now here's how you do it. Now go do it. It won't work. And the second principle is that evangelism is more caught than taught. Again, I'm all for teaching evangelism, but it just won't work somebody standing at a podium teaching evangelism. It really has to be modeled. People need on-the-job training. So if you're going to really have large success at this, you're going to need a strategy that is more than merely a class, certainly more than merely a single class or even a series of classes. It's an ongoing presence, and it's going to have to be something that models for it. The third principle is people do what we inspect, not what we expect. In other words, there needs to be built-in accountability. So what kind of structure can we have that is accountable, where we hold each other accountable for evangelism and for sharing the gospel? So there are a lot of different ways to do it. I'm going to tell you sort of my own personal history and then give you some key components that really might be a help and a blessing to you. And realizing that even as I record this, what I say now may not be completely up to date within a few months or a year from now. There might be something new and something even more helpful. That would be great. But these principles will still be true. So I grew up, in a circle of Baptists that was, I'm going to say, functionally hyper Calvinist. So I grew up being taught the doctrines of grace. Nobody was genuinely hyper Calvinist. No one was fatalistic. We talked about the gospel, but I never really saw anybody other than my dad, who was the pastor, share the gospel. And it just really wasn't done. Most people's idea of evangelism was memorizing the, the phone number of the parsonage. In other words, they would call my dad, Brother York, will you come talk to so and so? They need Jesus. And so I saw my dad sharing the gospel, and I would even go with him to do it. But I really wasn't learning how to lead a church to do it. When I went to seminary, and this is, remember, after 7 years, I was on staff at a church for 7 years, and then I went to seminary. I joined the First Baptist Church of West Memphis, Arkansas, and a man named Tommy Henson was the pastor there. So we lived in eastern Arkansas. The seminary was in Memphis, across the river. But Tommy Henson let me know real quick. I went and met with him. I said, what can I do to be a blessing and a help to you? And he said, well, you can go witnessing with me. Yeah, okay, let's go. And I'll never forget, Tommy Henson takes me, and we go into this little shack in West Memphis, Arkansas. And Tommy Henson begins to share the gospel with this guy. Somebody had given him his name. And Tommy Henson asked him what I later learned were the two diagnostic questions from Evangelism Explosion. Have you come to the place in your spiritual life where you know for certain that you have eternal life? And the second question is, suppose you were to die tonight, and you were to stand before God, and he were to ask you, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say to God? And so I go with Brother Henson into this little house, and there's this guy, and I can tell he's a drug user. Everything about the scene tells me he's a drug user. Brother Henson asked him those questions, and the guy said, well, no, I don't know for sure that I'd go to heaven. And Brother Henson then asked him that second question, what would you say to God if he were to say, why should I let you into my heaven? And the guy says, well, I'd say I tried to be a good person, and I never really hurt anybody. Everything I did was to myself. I mean, he gets that he's not really a good person, but he's still holding on to the fact that he's not hurt anybody. Well, Brother Henson launches into what I later learned was the Evangelism Explosion gospel presentation. It's based on 5 points. And this guy, in the middle of it, he would ask questions, he would interrupt. Brother Henson could deal with the questions, answer honestly, and he really began to probe the guy really pointedly. The guy admitted that he was on heroin. And Brother Henson blew me away. He started saying, okay, now how do you ingest this? Do you mainline, or do you take it into, or do you snort it, or what do you do? I was sort of stunned. Here's Brother Henson, who was in no way hip to the drug culture, asking these very pointed questions. And he's just beginning to show the guy how broken his life is and how desperate his need of Christ was. And before we left there that night, that fellow put his faith and trust in Christ. A couple of weeks later, I saw Brother Henson baptize him. And when we left that church, he was still a faithful member of the church. That's been decades ago. I couldn't tell you now, but at the time, his life bore witness that it was a genuine conversion. Well, I knew that, man, that's what I want. And Brother Henson showed me how they used Evangelism Explosion there at the church, and explained it to me. They had, at that time, 16-week semesters, and you would sign up for this class for 16 weeks. Every week you would come, so there would be a trainer, and each trainer would be given 2 trainees, and each week you had a component of homework, some scripture memorization, memorize a little portion of the gospel presentation outline, and you do the classwork, and then you go out. You go visit people, most of whom had visited the church. So a church large enough that had a lot of visitors. You basically would go cold call, knock on their door. Hey, you visited our church Sunday. We thought we'd return the visit, and we'd like to talk to you. And then, especially in the South, people would open their homes and go in, and you could share the gospel with them. When I became pastor at Ashland Avenue Baptist Church in 1990, very first thing I did was I sent my whole staff to an EE clinic so that they could get certified immediately as EE trainers. And then we began our first semester. I think we had 7 or 8 teams, and it just grew exponentially. And over the course of the years I was at Ashland Avenue, we became what's called a clinic base church. So other pastors and their staffs would come to us and we'd have a clinic that started usually on, I think on Thursday or Friday, when we'd go through that weekend. And we just had a marvelous time. And our church grew immensely. By the time I left in 1997 to come teach at Southern Seminary, the church had more than doubled, running from about under 500 to running about 1,200 in 7 years. And the majority of that growth was through Evangelism Explosion. When I say that it was through EE, what I really mean is it was through the regular training of our people to share the gospel. Almost nobody ever got saved in a church service. What happened was our people were leading folks to Christ during the week, sometimes on EE visits, often just on their jobs. And it became the ethic of the church that we share the gospel, we share our faith. And most of the people we saw baptized, and I think we at our best year baptized over 100 people, and it was largely through our members sharing the gospel with others. Now, I still believe that basic system is the best system. EE has changed it quite a bit since then. They did shorten the semester to 13 weeks. But as I'm saying this, I know some of you are listening to me going, wow, I just don't think I can get people to sign up for that. I don't think I can get people to commit to that. Well, there is your challenge. This is the challenge of church leadership in general, is that you're trying to get people to do something that is a lifestyle orientation, and yet you're trying to get them to do it, listen to you 1 hour on Sunday mornings. It just really doesn't work. So I know the challenge, but you're going to have to get people to commit on some level on a regular basis. Now, I will tell you, another principle I think that you need to learn is start small and grow strong. Start small and grow strong. So my first church, when I left, actually First West Memphis, where I was a member while I was in seminary, I got called to pastor First Baptist Church of Marion, which was just 4 miles up the road from West Memphis. I borrowed members, EE trained members from First West Memphis. I said, would you guys be willing to come and help me train people at First Marion? And several members did. Brother Henson got several of his members. So on Thursday night, I got, I think maybe, I'm going to say 6 people to sign up from Marion to say they would be trained. So that means I needed 3 trainers. So you got 2 trainees and 1 trainer on each team. And so I think I had myself and 2 guys from West Memphis that we started out with 3 teams. So at the end of that first semester, now I've got 6 trainees and myself. So we let those guys from West Memphis go back if they want. I think one of them chose to do it a second semester. So I think I had 8 teams that second semester. Now look at that. That's 24 people going out each week. So I started with 0. I hadn't had it before I came as pastor. By my second semester, I've got 24. And you can see if you don't lose any by attrition, which that won't happen, but if you didn't lose any by attrition, that means your second week, your next semester, you could have 72. That's a lot of teams. So let's just say that you retain half of those. All right, man, you got 36. That's a lot of teams going out sharing the gospel. In fact, at Ashland Avenue, we were so successful in getting people recruited and trained and staying in the program that we then we really had to work hard to have enough visits. We were asking people if they knew lost people we could visit. We tried to have events to get people to come to our church just so we could go visit people. I did a thing called Midday Manna in Lexington. I'll talk more about that perhaps in a little bit. That was on Thursday afternoons, a Bible study and luncheon. And we offered a great meal for $5. Now this was in the 1990s. $5 for a home-cooked meal. We had a meat and vegetables, dessert, and iced tea. And I would sometimes have 400 people come to that, most of whom were not members of Ashland Avenue. But we'd have them all fill out a form. Well, that gave us visits. So here's the point I'm wanting to make is that you've got to strategize on a lot of levels. You got to strategize to train your people. You've got to strategize about how to have people to reach. And we did both of those things. So EE worked. And I will tell you that it would do you good just to read the book, Evangelism Explosion by D. James Kennedy. I love the book. I love the story of the book because D. James Kennedy was the pastor of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, but he started out as an Arthur Murray dance instructor. And one morning, his clock radio goes off, and he hears a radio preacher by the name of Donald Gray Barnhouse. Now, Donald Gray Barnhouse was the reigning intellectual evangelical of his day. Think of Al Mohler of the 1950s. And he pastored 10th Presbyterian in Philadelphia. This is where later James Montgomery Boyce would be pastor. Phil Ryken would be an associate pastor there. But Barnhouse was the pastor there back in the 50s and early 60s. And just a tremendous impact. Brilliant pastor. And he had this sermon called Your Right to Heaven. D. James Kennedy's clock radio goes off. There's Donald Gray Barnhouse preaching Your Right to Heaven. And he asked the question, and by the way, here's exactly the way Barnhouse sounds. This is York's impression of Donald Gray Barnhouse. Listen to this. Pause your lesson and then look up on the internet a video or an audio of Donald Gray Barnhouse, and you'll hear that I sound exactly like him. You ready? I've listened to hundreds of this guy's sermons. I'm dead on. You ready? Suppose you were to die tonight, and you were to stand before God, and he were to say, why should I let you into my heaven? What do you suppose you would say to God? Now, he sounded exactly like that. That's the way D. James Kennedy heard the question, and it made him ask that in his own life. As a result, D. James Kennedy trusts the Lord and becomes ultimately a preacher. He goes to seminary, and when he pastors his first church, he would tell the story about how he went to hold a revival for a guy, and this guy was much more an evangelist than he was, and they'd go out soul winning, and the guy thought that D. James Kennedy would know how to do it, but he didn't really know how to do it. So Kennedy watched the other guy do it. He goes back and he says, man, I've got to get a handle on this. The result of Kennedy's own experience, both in salvation and then watching this other pastor lead people to Christ, the result was he wrote this book, Evangelism Explosion. And it is a simple gospel outline. It has chapters in there like handling objections. Well, what do you say if somebody says, well, I don't believe in God. I don't believe there is a heaven, or I don't believe the Bible. How do you answer those? When do you know when to research and return with an answer, or when to put aside their question. He deals with all of that in Evangelism Explosion. Now, my opinion, which I highly value, is that Evangelism Explosion remains the Cadillac. It is the best gospel presentation I've ever heard, because it's just so thorough. You can, if you learn Evangelism Explosion, you learn that gospel presentation. You can tell it. You can, if somebody gives you 5 minutes, you can do it. If they give you an hour, you can do it. It is adaptable. It gives you illustrations to use, how to relate to people, lots of Bible verses. So I love Evangelism Explosion. It's still a great way, and there is still an Evangelism Explosion organization. You can order their materials. You can go get trained at a clinic, church, and learn how to do it and implement it in your church. And frankly, I think it's by far the best, simply because it gives you an infrastructure, and it builds. You can do it. It's doable. It breaks everything down. There have been thousands of other churches that have done it before you. They've already learned all the problems that can occur. So I love EE. Southern Baptists have, to various degrees, I'll say borrowed from charitably. The more accurate term would probably be ripped off EE. When we came up with one we called CWT, Continuous Witness Training. The other was called Faith, and it was, at one point, Southern Baptists actually tried to get the rights for EE, and we're going to use it as our denominational tool to put in our churches, because the vast majority of EE churches are, in fact, Southern Baptist churches. But it got down to copyright royalties. Thomas Nelson would not relinquish the rights to publish the book Evangelism Explosion. Lifeway would not then take it any other way, so they said, we'll write our own, and they came up with a program called Faith. I don't even know if anybody's still doing Faith. It was okay. It wasn't as good and logical in its presentation, I don't think, as EE. But you know what? Even a program that's not as good as EE is better than no program at all. So I'm grateful for any church that uses CWT or EE. There's also, many of you are probably familiar with the book Master Plan of Evangelism, and Master Plan has been used. Now Southern Baptists have Jimmy Scroggins, our own Jimmy Scroggins, who was the dean at Boyce College and was youth pastor at Highview Baptist Church, now pastor of Family Church in West Palm Beach, Florida. He came up with this 3 circles, and it is phenomenal. So I'm going to ask you to watch. You can look that up on the internet, North American Mission Board. There's even an app for it that you can use that app, and you can download the app. You can use it. So it basically involves drawing 3 circles on a napkin or a board or a piece of paper or anything, and you're just talking about God's design and creation, brokenness, the gospel, and how the gospel gives us restoration, and you can show that. So here's the benefit. The problem with EE now, I think EE sort of assumes an understanding of a person's spiritual need. It assumes a cultural understanding of heaven. There is a heaven, and we all want to go there. In our culture, that's certainly no longer necessarily true. So EE starts at the point of what would you say to God if he were to say, why should I let you into my heaven? And it really starts with this desire to go to heaven, but now so many in our culture aren't even thinking about heaven. What the Three Circles presentation does, it begins with, here's God's design, and man, here's where we live. We're broken. And it really starts with the goodness of God and the brokenness of life and what God has done to restore us to his original design. And Jimmy tells the story. Jimmy Scroggins tells the story. And you can go on YouTube and find this. You can, again, see this on the NAM app, actually, I think, has a video of Jimmy sharing the Three Circles story. And you can see the way that he uses that. Like someone comes into his office, they want to talk, and they're messed up. They're sexually broken, or they're morally broken. Their family is broken. They've blown it as a parent, whatever it might be. You don't really have to argue with people much that they're broken. People get that they're broken. Now, maybe they're blaming the rest of the world for their brokenness. Maybe they think someone else did that to them. But the Three Circles is a great presentation. And one of the best things you can do is get your people to download that app. So if you say, okay, EE is too big of a program, I don't think I can get my folks to do that, then ask yourself, okay, what can I get my people to do? And I think if you will take a Sunday or two to go through it and teach people how to do it, get everybody to download that app, have a few practice sessions where people get accustomed to sharing the Three Circles presentation with somebody, and then have them go out into homes and do it, then you've still got an ongoing training program. The key is you can't just tell people to do it and expect they're going to do it. You've got to build in accountability. So what would it look like if every deacons meeting began with, okay, who can share with us about telling someone the gospel in the past couple of weeks? And okay, if it's quiet as crickets, you wait a little while. You let people hear the quiet. And then you say, okay, and here's where it's important that you say, okay, well, I'll go first. And then you tell something that's fresh. Don't go back 3 years. But in the last week or two, when's the last time you shared the gospel with somebody? And you begin the meeting that way. So if you have a finance committee meeting, a deacons meeting, if you will build that into the DNA of your church so that everything we do is based on the gospel, our evangelism, then man, that's just gonna catch. Remember, I told you, evangelism is more caught than taught. You do have to teach it, but nobody's going to do it just because you taught it. They're going to do it because they see it, they hear it over and over, and especially when they see people in your church that were led to Christ by someone else in the church. You've always got to be telling those stories. So if you're in a church where you can show videos, if there's someone that has been led to Christ by someone else in your church, and you just get a little video testimony, you edit that down to 2.5 minutes, where someone just tells about hearing the good news, and you show that. If you did that every Sunday, that is an ongoing, in essence, an accountability. Remember, one principle that I just repeat over and over is you reproduce what you honor. So if you will honor evangelism by talking about it all the time, by sharing those stories, by letting people tell their testimonies, and by making it the norm, then people in your church will do that. This is just the key. You're not going to have an evangelistic church unless you yourself are evangelistic And unless you build into the structure of your church means of learning evangelism, means of doing evangelism, and then accountability, so you hold each other accountable. Now, you need to add to that what I call big days. So once you equip your people with the gospel, and you tell them this is the norm, we share the gospel, then you're going to have to do things that generate opportunities for them to share the gospel. And they can be things like, well, one of the simplest things to do is just take a map of your church and draw a radius around your church, depending on how dense the population is. So we can tell you here at Buck Run, within a 3-mile radius, I don't remember the number, but we've got it. And in fact, as I'm recording this, in about 2 weeks, I think we're planning a day where our members go out on a Saturday and we try and reach every home within a 3-mile radius of our church. And we're going to at least let them know we're here, let them know we care, and we're going to share the gospel with as many as will allow us to do that. Now, in that radius, some of those people are already saved and going to other churches. Great, praise the Lord. We still want them to know we're here, because so much of really good pastoral leadership is learning how to position your church in the minds of people near your church. So I know there are people that aren't looking for a church right now. They're not interested in a new church right now. Maybe they're not interested in the gospel right now. But if I can put in their mind the name, location, the personality and tenor, if you will, of Buck Run Baptist Church, so that when they do wake up, when they do come to themselves, they go, Buck Run Baptist Church, that's where I need to go. So, think of the story of the prodigal. The prodigal son, when he's away from home, there's a point at which he's not really ready to receive the invitation to come home. If you go to the prodigal son while he still has money in his pocket and prostitutes on his elbows, and say, son, don't you long to go home? Don't you miss your father? He's going to look at you like you're crazy. He does not care about those things. But when he wakes up in the pig pen, when the money's gone and the friends have disappeared and the prostitutes are no more, and he's ready to fill his belly with that which the pigs eat, that's when he comes to himself. And if you've been there and you've knocked on that door just to get in their minds the position of your church, so that when they have that moment, they say, I need to go somewhere. Where do I go? Buck Run. That comes to their mind. Now think of your church and putting the name of your church in their minds. So much of what you do when you're a pastor is trying to figure out how to get the name of your church in the minds of people around your church. I fear that sometimes we're way too introverted. We focus all of our ministries inside the church instead of outside. But, I'll tell you what we're like. So we're like, imagine that, here in Kentucky, not far from central Kentucky, there's a place called Red River Gorge. It's a wild, beautiful place, lots of natural arches and trails to walk. But every year, without fail, every year people die in the Red River Gorge, usually because they fall off a cliff. And sometimes they're walking along a trail, they're not paying attention, and the next thing you know, they walked off a cliff. Sometimes they die of exposure, but every year people die in the Red River Gorge. Let's imagine that there's a family there, and they're hiking, and they lose their 4-year-old daughter, Amanda. So the word goes out, a 4-year-old little girl is missing in the Red River Gorge, and they put out all kinds of appeals. Come help us search for Amanda. And let's say that it's in a cold time of the year. She could die of exposure at night. She would be exposed to carnivorous animals that are in there, black bear or bobcats or things like that, and she could be hurt. She could easily fall off of a cliff. The point is that it's urgent, and they need to reach Amanda. So let's just say that we drop everything, and we go up there to the Red River Gorge to help search for Amanda. And when we get there, there's a sign directing us to the campground at Natural Bridge State Park. And that's the headquarters for the search and rescue for Amanda. So when we get there, we notice something strange. The moment we pull into the campground, we smell burgers and hot dogs, and people are, well, they're organizing games. There's a softball game going. Old men are playing shuffleboard, all kinds of fun activities happening. And so we pull in there, and we get out, and we say, we're here to look for Amanda. And they say, oh, yeah, the headquarters is set up right there. And they direct us to a particular Winnebago camper. And we go over there, knock on the door opens up, and we say, we're here to search for Amanda. The guy says, oh, great. We're delighted that you're here. Welcome. I tell you what, there's some hot dogs and hamburgers that have just been prepared. I know you want to eat. And I believe they're getting a volleyball game going over on the south end of the campground. If that's a little too physical for you, I believe they got some rook games happening and different things that are going on. So just feel free, make yourself at home. We're glad you've come. We're confused by this. We say, excuse me, we're here to search for Amanda. He said, yeah, we're all here to search for Amanda. Yeah, but we sort of thought it was urgent. And then he steps back with a little bit of disgust on his face, and he says, oh, you're one of those fanatics, are you? Now listen, who are you to judge us? Don't you realize that all of these campers and these fifth wheels and these nice Airstreams and Winnebagos and motorhomes, that they represent a major investment on the part of all the people who are here? And are you really going to judge us for taking time to enjoy a little bit of this on ourselves? I mean, after all, these people have worked hard for this, and, you know, we care about Amanda. That's why we've come. But, you know, we think that it's all right for us to enjoy this on ourselves. And just so you know, every morning at 10 o'clock, someone walks over to the edge of the campground and calls Amanda's name. And we put up signs along the perimeter of the campground saying, Amanda, come this way to be found. You know, we sort of have a sneaking suspicion if she really wanted to be found, she could be. Now, you're thinking probably, Dr. York, that is really the dumbest illustration I've ever heard. And it is a pretty dumb illustration. In fact, I can only think of one thing worse than that, and that's the average Baptist church. Because we have made our churches about recreation instead of rescue. We've made it about the searchers instead of the one who needs to be found. So when you go out into your church and you're all gung-ho about teaching them the doctrines of grace or leading them in plurality of elders or whatever the thing on your heart and mind is, I would just ask you, is that the thing on the heart and mind of Jesus? Is that the thing that really causes the heart of God to rejoice? Jesus was really clear about this in Luke 15. That what makes God rejoice, when there's rejoicing in the presence of the angels, is when one sinner repents. More than over leading the church to become to have a plurality of elders, or to believe in the doctrines of grace. Whatever thing you might want to put in there, what gladdens the heart of God is when the lost are found. So what's your strategy? What are you going to do? Maybe you don't like EE. Maybe you don't like the three circles. All right. What do you like? And what are you doing to really reach the lost? Not just get the saved glad they're saved, but how can you lead your church to always be engaging people with the gospel? That is our task. So we have a Saturday where we're going to go knock on doors. Is that our primary means of reaching people? By no means. But I don't want anybody within a 3-mile radius of Buck Run saying, that church has been out here by us now 2.5 years. They've never even said boo to us. I don't want anybody going to hell thinking we don't care about them. So maybe that's not the most effective way to reach them. I'm convinced it's not the most effective way. But it is a way. And until we've exhausted all of them, I'm not ruling out any of them. So we have to do that. Another simple thing to do are big days. The natural big days are Easter and Christmas. So what are you doing to reach people on days that, they might be inclined to come to church? Now, when I was young and foolish, I used to sort of make fun. I remember one time, here's one of those things, don't do as I did, do as I say. One time on Easter Sunday, we get a big crowd on Easter Sunday, and one time at the end of the service on Easter Sunday, I said, well, I want to say Merry Christmas because that's the next time I'll see some of you. Well, that was just dumb. It's true. But why would I try and make people feel guilty for coming to church? All that's going to do is make them say, well, I'm not going there. That guy tries to make me feel guilty for coming. I know Adrian Rogers used to call them the holly lily crowd. They only show up when you got either Christmas hollies or Easter lilies out. Okay, that's true. But I'm glad that they show up and I get to preach the gospel to them. Every now and then, someone hears the gospel on those days and is saved. So what are you doing on those days? We do mail-outs to invite people to come for Easter Sunday, Christmas Sunday. We take ads in the paper, Facebook ads, anything we can do to generate that image in people's minds. Hey, I'm going to go to church on Easter. Where am I going to go? I want them to say Buck Run if they're near us. So we try and capitalize on those big days. You can do Easter egg rolls or whatever, Easter egg hunts to get kids, different things like that. The other thing are those artificial big days. That is, they're not on the calendar, but they're days you generate, like a friend day, the simplest thing. A friend day in which you promote this well in advance and try and get like the biggest local politician you can, the mayor, the governor, or somebody to commit to come as your friend on that day. Tell your people, oh man, I've got the governor coming on Friend Day on, by the way, first Sunday of November is a great time to do it. The time change Sunday. People are going to get that extra hour sleep anyway. The worst Sunday to do it would be the time change Sunday in the spring because people lose an hour sleep, but you want to take advantage of that. And if you get I'm talking months in advance, promote this. Get people in your church to commit. They're going to bring with them one person. And I've seen it done where churches actually double in attendance on that one Sunday because some people are going to bring a whole family. But you got to promote it. You can't just say it and tepidly put it out there. There are whole programs to promote it. Elmer Towns used to have a whole program you could buy about how to promote your Friend Day. And he would guarantee if you did what he said, you could double your attendance. And it was true, you could, because he really helped you work it in advance, get your people excited. And so you got to generate these days where you get a lot of people to come and they hear the gospel. Some of them might come back. Some of them might hear the gospel in a way that it begins to take root. But don't discount the value of those big days. So when you combine all of these strategies, so you're training your people constantly, you're talking about the gospel, you're getting them committed to it, you're holding each other accountable, you're beginning meetings talking about the gospel. And then you're doing everything you can to turn the focus from focusing within the church to focusing outside the church. What can we do to reach them? You begin to teach your church. You're building, as we built the building in which I'm actually recording this here at Buck Run, as we built this building, I emphasized over and over, we're building a building for people we don't even know yet. And that's what you got to do. You got to get your church to see that we exist for the glory of the Lord Jesus Christ and for people we don't even know yet. And so as you flip the focus from inward to outward, and how do you prove where your focus is? Look at two things, your budget and your calendar. Show me how you're spending your time and your money, and I can tell you what your priorities are. So if you take an honest look at your budget and your calendar, well, what about your budget and your calendar says you care about lost people? This is where you as the pastor have to just constantly fight the battle to keep that focus from turning inward, to keeping it out there. Budget and calendar. How does it reflect our commitment to the lost? So while we're teaching, training, holding each other accountable, now we're strategizing to reach the lost. Website, broadcast, podcast, little invitation, print up invitations for your people to give. Just little, cards that give people, say you're invited to Buck Run Baptist Church. Everything you can to position your church in the mind of people so that when they are looking for a church or when they do have a need, they know where to come. All of this, and over the course of months, years, this feeds on itself, and that's when you get really an evangelistic church, and that is absolutely essential to obedience to Christ.